What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new comedy Splitsville, which is in limited release this weekend, but going into wide release on September 5th. And no one is more surprised than I to admit this. I liked the movie. I laughed at the movie. I found it to be perfectly charming. And the reason I say I'm surprised is because I went into this movie kind of actively rooting against it or just expecting to despise it based on the trailer. And I rewatched the trailer right before this video. The trailer's totally fine. I don't know if I was just in a grumpy mood or if I was tired the first time I saw the trailer, but I remember thinking to myself at the time, there is nothing I'd rather do less than spend 2 hours in the company of these two guys featured front and center in the trailer. But having now seen the movie, I love these guys.
By the way, Julie and I had sex last night. Together.
Michael Angelo Covino and Kyle Marvin, they co-wrote the movie, they co-star in the movie, and Michael Angelo Covino directed the movie. And they've won me over. Whatever they do moving ahead, I will definitely check it out. And part of me was thinking to myself about halfway through the movie, these two dirty dogs, here we have two kind of average-looking, kind of schlubby dudes who are co-starring with Dakota Johnson and Adria Arjona, two of the sexiest women on planet Earth. And in the interest of full transparency and honesty, it's because of Adria Arjona that I even saw this movie in the first place. I was on social media the other day and I saw some pictures from the premiere for this movie where I saw Adria and Dakota posing side by side. I was like, you know what? Maybe I rushed to judgment when I first saw the trailer. Maybe there's something here that's worth exploring because Dakota and Adria are two of the best young actresses out there. Adria Arjona really got my attention in Hitman, the Richard Linklater movie with Glenn Powell, where I thought she was absolutely funny as shit. She's obviously a very beautiful woman, but she's got incredible comedic chops, incredible timing, and incredible chemistry with her male co-stars. So I knew she could be funny when backed into a corner. And as far as Dakota Johnson is concerned, there's something about her very calm, almost meditative energy that I find irresistible. We live in a media landscape that's kind of shrieking and hysterical most of the time. And here comes Dakota Johnson, where everything she says is kind of understated and mellow.
We are not monogamous. He can do what he wants, and I don't want to know about it. Unless I do want to know about it.
All right, yeah, you just need to have like a permanent like ASMR channel where you just kind of talk about nothing. She could just read the phone book and it would calm down the entire planet. So I'm a big fan of both of these actresses. But once again, Michael Angelo Covino and Kyle Marvin, these are two of the luckiest sons of guns on the planet because not only did they get to work with these amazing actresses, they delivered. The script delivers a lot of laughs, a lot of sexy beats, a lot of unexpected but very welcome violence. And I guess now's as good a time as any to describe the plot of this movie. According to IMDb, when Ashley asks for a divorce, the good-natured Carrie runs to his friends Julie and Paul for support. Their secret to happiness is an open marriage, that is, until Carrie crosses the line and throws all the relationships into chaos. And I guess that's as good a way to describe the plot as any, but suffice to say, there's a lot of screwing around going on between these two couples as well as outside of their relationships. It's just total bedlam and chaos and heartbreak and jealousy and hurt feelings and false confidence and a lot of very humorous and a lot of very sexy moments.
You're telling me that if she goes out, finds someone, and they hit it off, and then they decide to go do some doggy style in the back of a pickup truck in a parking lot somewhere, you can handle that?
That is really romantic.
But what it reminded me of the most was an early 90s Woody Allen movie called Husbands and Wives. And Husbands and Wives is shot in a much more kind of pseudo-documentary style, and it's much more bitter and it's much more acidic, but it's one of Woody Allen's best movies from that period. This movie is much more lighthearted than that, but the dynamics between these two couples are very reminiscent of that movie, Husbands and Wives. But there's also some pretty generous helpings of late 80s, early 90s Hal Hartley. And for people who don't know, Hal Hartley in the late 80s and the early 90s was absolutely the king of the New York independent movie scene with movies like The Unbelievable Truth or Trust or Simple Men or Henry Fool. I mean, these movies are just fantastic. But those movies are very intellectual and very like almost bordering on pretentious, but people describe him as the Jean-Luc Godard of Long Island. But what I love about Hal Hartley's movies is that even if they're talking about Dostoevsky or some highbrow material, at any given moment, they'll just break out into fistfights or wrestling matches and that sort of thing, and they'll just have open brawls while you hear like Sonic Youth raging in the background. This movie is very similar to that, where there's funny violence lurking behind every corner, especially in one lengthy scene where I was just cracking up at these two best friends just beat 7 shades of shit out of each other and just completely destroy this house. It almost got into like Three Stooges territory, or like definitely that kind of madcap energy of 1930s, like screwball comedies and like, you know, movies by the Marx Brothers and that sort of thing. I have a feeling that if I were to sit down and talk about old-fashioned comedies or just comedies from like the 30s through the 90s with these two writers, I imagine that I would love and adore a lot of their taste. But the biggest surprise for me by far was the performance by Kyle Marvin. It was due to my mistaken first impression of him from the trailer, where I didn't want to see the movie at all. I was like, you know what, this guy's just kind of got that Ken doll energy, and I just don't want to watch any story featuring him front and center. But within about 3 or 4 minutes, he just had me absolutely howling. The movie opens up, and I guess this is kind of spoiler-light territory, but it's featured prominently in the trailer. But the movie opens up with Adria Arjona saying she wants a divorce. He loses his shit, and he runs off into the woods. And then the trailer just makes it seem like he's having a silly little temper tantrum.
Carrie!
But this movie relies on some really strong visual storytelling to sell some of the gags, because as soon as he runs off into the woods, suddenly we're on this like Homeric odyssey through the swamps and rivers and lakes of New England as he runs off, and it's almost like Chevy Chase in the desert in National Lampoon's Vacation, where he's walking around with his pants on his head and throwing his watch aside and that sort of thing. And suddenly I realized that, yeah, Kyle Marvin, perhaps I've misjudged this guy. And he definitely has a bit of that kind of beta male energy, but he's doing it on purpose. That's part of the gags of the movie, where people are constantly underestimating him or taking him for granted because he has that quintessential kind of friend zone, nice guy energy. But in the end, he gets the last laugh because he spends a great deal of this movie making love to astonishingly beautiful women. In any case, Neon deserves yet another high five for getting behind these kinds of low-budget movies. But I'll say this, any movie that can deliver a complete story in an hour and 40 minutes that has a lot of laughs, a lot of heart, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of jealousy, a lot of fist fights, just a lot of just kind of bedlam and insanity, and wrap it all up and put a nice bow on it with a nice happy ending. At a minimum, it's worth a shot. I think it's worth a look. It's not going to be for everybody because romantic comedies can be off-putting to a lot of people with more cynical sensibilities. However, if you do have a cynical side and you dread those kind of cloying, saccharine moments where romantic comedies inevitably become incredibly sentimental or melodramatic, this movie surprisingly kind of deftly avoids all those moments. Like every time a lesser movie would just go into a very sad, weepy, kind of lame phase of the story, somehow it just veers into something totally unpredictable. Like, this is a major spoiler, so if you don't want any spoilers, bail out now. But a big part of the story is the fact that Adria Arjona wants to have a lot more sexual experiences with a lot more people, and she's eager to get out there and experiment and fool around. Problem is, all the guys that she fools around with, they all end up falling in love with her and basically moving in and refusing to leave. So over the course of the movie, she and her actual husband, whom she wants a divorce from, are sharing their home with this ever-growing club of guys, but they're actually all like very fun and very likable and very entertaining in their own ways, and they almost kind of form like a little clique or a little club, and they're having like movie nights where they watch Dr. Zhivago and things like that.
I'm telling you, this kind of shit happens all the time here.
But you would expect everybody to kind of like hate these guys and be rooting against them. But at a certain point, you're like, wait a second, can we just have like a sequel or spin-off movies with just those guys who are all obsessed with Adria Arjona? But I get it. I mean, there are times in this movie where this movie places probably a heavier emphasis on male nudity for comedic effect, but every once in a while, Adria Arjona will show a hint of skin, and there are a few scenes where I audibly groaned in my theater. Luckily, there were only 3 other people in the theater, so I don't know if they heard me or not. But if they heard me, I don't give a shit. Adria Arjona deserves the occasional groan. And as far as Dakota Johnson is concerned, I much prefer to see her making movies like this as opposed to making movies like Madam Web. Admittedly, Madam Web was such a spectacular failure, and she did such a brilliant job of kind of making fun of the movie at the same time as everybody else was, that in a weird way her stock went way up. And I was like, oh, she's one of the few people in Hollywood who knows how to laugh at themselves. She's one of the few people in Hollywood with a sense of humor. She's one of the few people that can acknowledge that Madam Web completely and totally sucks balls. Like maybe we should all just be the world's biggest fan of Dakota Johnson. But every once in a while, she'll try to make something really good, like Suspiria in 2018. I felt like the movie was only kind of a half success, but the half that worked really, really, really well. Or movies like A Bigger Splash that she made with Luca Guadagnino. Whatever the future might hold for her career, I hope it has a lot more movies like Splitsville as opposed to spin-offs and sequels to Madam Web. But what impressed me about director Michael Angelo Covino is that he's actually trying to do some interesting things with the camera in the context of this movie. With like a lot of romantic comedies, they just kind of plant the camera in a room, put 2 people on a sofa, and they talk about their feelings, and it gets real fucking boring really quickly. Michael Angelo Covino, he likes his camera to move, and he likes to kind of pick up other characters and follow them. Like during these scenes where all of Adria Arjona's lovers are all kind of competing for her affection in the home, the camera is following one after another through all these crazy conversations. And I was like, you know what? This movie might be pretending to be just your typical chick flick about love and heartache and feelings and that sort of thing. there's more going on here, and whatever Michael Angelo Covino does next, I will definitely be there first in line to see. He's got my full curiosity. I'm not ready to proclaim him the next big comedy giant or the next big comedy great, but he did make me laugh. And I guess I have a philosophical question now for viewers out there. Is the universe, in very subtle, quiet ways, trying to correct itself by resurrecting the comedy genre? This year has not given us any like breakout, runaway, successful comedy yet. But there have been a lot of attempts. And some of these attempts are more successful than others, but I feel like for about 10 years, comedy just kind of went underground and went into the comedy clubs and went over to podcasts and went over to like YouTube clips and that sort of thing. But movies just completely, totally abandoned comedy out in the woods. But it's been there all along. It's like a little ring that you lost in the woods. It's been waiting for us to go back out there and find it and like kind of polish it and say, oh yeah, people like to laugh. People like sexy stories with fun, entertaining characters. And I think this is further evidence that the wounds, the self-inflicted wounds of the last decade are beginning to heal. But let me tap the brakes a bit before I get carried away. We're still in the middle of a major drought when it comes to the comedy genre, because if you look back at the 1990s, comedies oftentimes were coming out every fucking weekend. And we had straight-to-video comedies, we had big-budget comedies, we had romantic comedies, we had dark comedies, we had sleazy comedies, we had like fake documentary, we had every kind of comedy. Like there were like 10 or 12 different categories of comedy within the comedy genre, and now it's like, it's just kind of a thin and fragile and feeble output. However, Splitsville has given me cause for hope. Clearly, there are filmmakers out there who want to make comedies. They want to tell these kinds of stories. Now the question is, like, does the audience even remember that they like these kinds of stories? Because comedies, for 100 years or 90 years were insanely profitable, insanely popular. And you can basically look at any era of filmmaking, starting with the 19-teens with the explosion of Charlie Chaplin up through like the early 2000s. You can find great comedies. And like there are great comedies that I still love and adore from all those decades. But if somebody said, what are the best comedies from the 20-teens? I'd be like, ugh, like, did any come out? I mean, I'm being a little unnecessarily harsh, but they were very rare and they were few and far between. So I'm banging the drum. I'm doing my part. I'm going to see these movies and I'm reviewing them when I like them and I'm trying to bring attention to them. So yeah, come September 5th, no matter where you live, I'm assuming Neon's going to give this a pretty robust push. They would not be releasing it 2 weeks early in New York if they didn't have some full confidence in it. I just hope that there are still people that are willing to get off their sofa and go to the theater like on a proper date night, or even better still, go with a group and then go out to dinner afterwards and get drunk and have a bunch of like sloppy intermarital affairs like we see in this movie. I feel like this is one of those movies that's just inviting 4 or 5 couples to go out to see the movies, have a good time. Maybe the time is right to slap your hand on the thigh of your best friend's girl that you've always had a crush on since you were kids. And obviously I'm being a little sarcastic, only half serious. But what I like about Splitsville is that when it comes to the subject of open relationships or open marriage, it doesn't act like this is some sort of really like kick-ass viable alternative. You're basically swapping out one set of problems for a different set of problems because when you're in a monogamous relationship, obviously it's full of all of its petty grievances and misunderstandings and bitterness and that sort of thing. But when you open up your relationship to more people, you're just inviting in just a different set of petty jealousies and grievances and misunderstandings and that sort of thing. And so maybe it's more fun because you're getting to get laid more often with more people, but you're just inviting a hell of a lot of chaos into your life, which leads to this fucking brawl in the movie. Since I'm in my spoiler section, I'll just say the brawl was making me laugh hard. Like at one point, Kyle Marvin gets blasted in the face with an aerosol can and a lighter, and you immediately see him, oh my God, like he's gonna have no face left. But instead, he just loses his eyebrows. And there's something about watching a guy who's angry and upset and fighting his best friend without any eyebrows, which is just, it was just making me crack up. And of course, their fights, like it's breaking tables and they're going out windows and they're smashing fish tanks and then they're trying to save the fish. It's complete and total bedlam. But part of great comedy is physical comedy. Like in the 1990s, Jim Carrey made a small fortune or a large fortune doing a lot of physical comedy, whether it's movies like Ace Ventura or Cable Guy or Liar Liar or Dumb and Dumber. Admittedly, he's a very, very funny, spastic dude, but a lot of the best comedy just involves him, falling down and making a complete spectacle of himself. So whatever kind of comedy you're into, I feel like Splitsville is doing its best to kind of resurrect all these little categories. So What can I say that's critical about the movie? Because I feel like I'm dangerously overselling it or overstating the case on its behalf, and it's not nearly as good as I probably described it as being. But the reality is, I've just seen so few comedies this year. I'm like, if you're dying of thirst and you see a glass of water, like, yes, thank you, but maybe it's just a glass of water. Maybe it's not a bottle of champagne. But you know what? Even though I'm trying to put on my meanest, most bitter, kind of cynical hat and offer a full-throated, robust criticism of the movie, there's nothing major that jumps out at me. So who knows? Maybe I'm not overselling the movie. Perhaps the one thing that that some people just won't accept or just won't buy is the idea that Michael Angelo Covino and Kyle Marvin, who are not going to win any beauty contests, that they could ever end up with these two goddesses. Or who knows? Some people may say, well, they've got other qualities that they bring to the table. Like one of them, I won't say who, has a giant penis. Giant penis, that goes a long way. And one of them is fabulously wealthy. Great wealth also goes a long way with some people. So Splitsville, it's probably going to end up on my top 10 list. And that's not saying much in 2025, where I feel like it's been a pretty thin year. It's one of those years where I've seen anywhere from like 10 to 20 movies that are pretty good, but no movies where I'm like, oh my God, this movie fucking rules. It's changed my life, blah, blah, blah. But Splitsville is pretty goddamn good. I'm going to recommend people check it out. But I guess the final lesson in all of this is that as much as I would like to believe that my first instincts or my gut reactions are always right, or that I'm omniscient, the reality is often wrong, but never in doubt is a more appropriate phrase. And so I misjudged the trailer, but I love being wrong when a movie overperforms or over-delivers relative to my expectations. So maybe this video is going to absolutely kind of sabotage what I'm trying to do, because I would like for people to go see this movie with the same rock bottom expectations and then be happily surprised. But at this point, obviously, I've ruined that whole strategy. But I think I need to go ahead and cut myself off, because if I don't, I'm going to run the risk of overselling the movie more than I already have. But there it is. I enjoyed Splitsville. This movie was not remotely on my radar, but it was a nice late summer surprise that totally caught me off guard. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell if you enjoyed this video. But I hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies, and I'll be back at y'all at the latest Sunday from a box office breakdown. But I'm getting into an early access screening of Caught Stealing tomorrow night, the new Darren Aronofsky movie. So I'll either review that either like late Sunday night or Monday, but any weekend where I'm seeing 3 new releases in the theater. That's a pretty good week at the movies, so stay tuned for all the above. But once again, thanks for watching. I greatly appreciate it, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.